There's a lot of people in the restaurant industry that make a lot of comments about black people. And they say, oh, black people, they don't like the tip. That's why I don't like serving blacks, so they don't like the tip. Well, what if I was to tell you the reason why many of you don't like the tip, it comes from a decent place, believe it or not. And tipping has a racist past. It is rooted in racism. But let's roll that clip.
Restaurant in the US, you're expected to tip. It's just the right thing to do. But what if I told you that tipping has a racist past? And it's not just because black waiters get smaller tips than their white coworkers, or that the tipped minimum wage just makes the poor poorer. It's that the custom of tipping in America was racist from the very beginning, and it goes all the way back to slavery. Tipping started among European aristocrats in the 17th century. Rich Americans adopted the practice in the mid-1800s, and it spread throughout the country after the Civil War. Here's why. According to research by activist Saru Jayaraman, newly freed slaves were flocking to major cities to find work. But they were only hired for jobs that were considered unskilled, mostly in restaurants. Racist restaurant owners embraced tipping as a way to hire free slaves without actually having to pay them any wages. And customers were down with this new practice because they believed it was natural to tip their inferiors. Racism and classism run deep. This attitude is summed up in this passage by a reporter in 1902.
I had never known any but Negro servants. Negroes take tips, of course. One expects that of them. It is a token of their inferiority. But to give money to a white man was embarrassing to me.
By the late 1880s, black workers accounted for nearly half of the hospitality industry. Then in the 20s, restaurants that were losing money because of Prohibition laws encouraged tipping, making it even more popular. Over time, tipping became the norm. And thanks to the powerful lobbying of the restaurant industry, in 1938, Congress passed America's first minimum wage law, allowing states to set a lower wage for tipped workers. In 1996, the then head of the National Restaurant Association, Herman Cain, convinced a Republican-led Congress to set a two-tiered wage system for tipped and non-tipped workers. The tipped minimum wage was set at $2.13 per hour. Today, in 17 states, the legal minimum wage for tipped workers still only $2.13 per hour. A century later, the inherent racism of tipping persists. Non-white restaurant workers take home 56% less than their white peers. And now there's a new demographic that's suffering: women. According to Jayaraman, almost 66% of the 6 million tipped workers in America are women. Europe, where this whole thing began, has long moved past tipping to pay restaurant workers a full wage. So maybe it's time for America to change its tipping culture too.
So you heard the history of tipping. A lot of free slaves were looking for work. They wasn't getting paid anything to work in these restaurants, and they tipped them. And the tipping was to tip your inferiors. It wasn't just for good service. So as you heard, as Herman Cain was a part of instituting the minimum wage for tip employees versus non-tip employees, you heard that a lot of the restaurants in the UK just went on ahead and paid them, I guess, a minimum wage on top of them getting tips as well, if that's what you choose to do. But it seems like black people had it right the first time about tipping. Now, me personally, I didn't know the history of this prior for me seeing this footage. But it took me a long time for me to tip also. I used to have the attitude like, tip them for what? That's their job. Why am I giving them extra money for something that's their job? I'm like, do you give somebody at McDonald's extra money for serving you, or Burger King, or one of them little fast food joints? I mean, they giving you food too. What's the difference? But I changed over the years, and I say, well, I don't want to be, stingy to people. If they give me a good service, they nice, I'll make sure to give them a good tip. I make sure to do that. And if you don't give me good service, I won't give you nothing more than maybe a $5 one. And that's lucky if you get that. But normally I tip pretty good when I go places and somebody treat me nice, treat my family nice, and they don't leave me unattended and make sure, they got everything taken care of. Then, yeah, I make sure I tip them. But I also thought that it was quite interesting that even with tipped people, white folks get more tips than black people. Why is that? I always thought that was real strange on that. Now, a lot of times when I go to restaurants, and I remember for sure at a meet and greet that we had in New York, and there's one sister did an awesome job, and she served about 20 of us. So I made sure to take care of it because she was like, oh, it's already in the gratuity. You don't have to. I said, no, sister, I want to give you some, put something else in your pocket because you did a real good job, and that's kind of how I am. I do that. I don't mind, like I said, especially when you just treat me nice. I know as a, black man walking anywhere, you look that funny. So that's fine. I appreciate you looking at me funny because the person that's going to serve me and do well, they the one going to be blessed that day. It won't be you that's looking at me funny and thinking, oh, it's a black man, he ain't going to do anything. Then they going to come back and say, man, I got a good tip from him. But, everything in this country is rooted always in racism. Always remember that. Everything in this country and the foundation has to do with skin tone. They thinking they're more than you and X, Y, Z, but we got really breaking it down physically. We start breaking it down in many other areas. That's the complete opposite. But the history of this country, like I said, is not a good one, and they don't want to educate you in school to a lot of things that we talk about here on this channel. So I always believe that the more knowledge and education you receive, the more you can be a critical thinker, and they can't just fool you with any old thing. But leave me a comment there, know what you think about the situation with tipping, and let me know, now that you have this knowledge, are you going to tip from now on? Since, if a person do a good job for you, you're going to say, man, forget that. That's rooted in racism.